The other kind of big issue that's also been touched on earlier is the whole issue around sustainability and CSR. And again, and maybe to be a little bit more controversial, this is one of those topics that grew in importance up until the beginning of the recession, and then, as we all know, kind of faded away from many people, particularly in the property industry, as there was this whole issue around how much it pushed up costs and who should pay for it. But still, there's a disconnect between what the corporate real estate world is saying, at least to us, and as you'll see on the next slide, what the business world is saying. So on here you can see there's about 60% scored green credentials as relatively unimportant, which I'm taking the sort of the 1 to 6 category. Only 40% of high importance, 7 to 10. And the big issue that's been driving that is probably the cost, which is in the bars on the bottom. We can see that some corporates saying they're willing to pay a little bit more. We know there's been a lot of pushback from landlords. There's a big debate about what should be done, how it should be done, and who should be paying for it. And actually what's not happening is us figuring out as an industry how to do that. And it's giving the customers what they want, which is what we've been hearing about from our 2 earlier speakers. So I think there's a huge issue that is yet to be addressed, and as we grow out of recession and perhaps costs get a little bit eased, this is a topic that is going to come back to the forefront. And I say that because if you look at this graph, it talks about sustainability is important to the business. So this isn't CRE directors, this is the business. And this comes from the European Cities Monitor survey that we do every year and was done earlier this year. So 80% of businesses, 80% ranked it as important, very important, or fundamental to their business. Yet on the slide before, I was saying that only 50-odd% in the CRE world are considering it to be important. So there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. In the UK, we're apparently better at doing this, if you like, than we are across Europe. Although if you took specific European countries like Germany, or you looked at the Nordics, I think you'd find that the UK is beginning probably to lag behind. And the critical question is, why is this so important to companies? Because if we know why it's important to businesses, then from a real estate point of view, we can figure out what we want to do. And I believe it's about 3 things. I think primarily it's about brand. And I think real estate has a huge part to play in that, and it's something that we haven't got right yet. I think it's about attracting and retaining staff, and particularly the Y and what I always refer to as the Z generation. That's the generation in schools we haven't given a name to yet, who are going to come into the workforce in the next 2 to 3 years. These guys want something different to what we want, and I think these green credentials is a really interesting part about that. And again, growth in corporate business over the next 5 to 10 years is about attracting and retaining the right staff. So I think we've got those 2 drivers, and on top of that, we've got productivity. Everyone wants to grow productivity and keep costs flatlining. So all of us are being now challenged with flatlining costs, or even still trying to decrease them in an era where headcount is going to grow, top line revenue is going to grow, and there's a real need to drive that differential between costs and revenue so profits go up. We also know that CSR is being driven in a number of different ways, which are in a way out of our hands. And it's a question of whether we want to be ahead of everyone or behind. The business agenda is driving it faster than the corporate real estate, it would seem from these statistics. That's not true in every business, it's not true in every part of the world. But there's a large part of it, a lot of part of this research in the detail is telling us that there's that differential. I think secondly, the legislation is clearly only going to increase. We heard today about George Osborne raiding the cookie jar and taking all the money that was effectively being ploughed back in on the CRCs and using it elsewhere. Legislation and tax around this is only going to increase as a way of improving what governments do and what governments are challenging each other to do from a global point of view. And I think the third critical factor is staff. I think this is going to become more important to the people that we attract to our businesses and grow in our businesses. And I think they are going to, once the economy picks up and they have a better choice of where they can work, I think this is going to come back to where it was about 3 years ago as a critical factor in all the factors that someone looking at a company will think about and make a choice based on that. So this is not just a business issue. It's an HR issue and it's a CRE issue. And like many of these things, it's on the periphery sometimes of what we do, but I think there's a real need to think about it in some more detail.